Look into my eyes in this episode of Battle Guides featuring Adjenna, the Dragon Queen. Adjenna is a character with an alternate win condition, which means that even if the opponent had 20 HP, she can still win games. This, coupled in with her range and some tricky effects, make Adjenna a great challenger for all of those she faces. However, her stats are lackluster, which means that you'll need some great prediction and a change of mindset to play properly. Adjenna's unique ability is Crystal Gaze. Adjenna has 5 petrification counters, and at the end of the beat, if she's adjacent to the opponent and she wasn't stunned, she gives that opponent a petrification counter. Now these counters don't do anything on their own. However, a lot of Adjenna's styles do take the number of counters into account. Now, if the opponent would gain a 6th petrification counter, they get eliminated from the game instead. Meaning that Adjenna wins the game as long as she gives the opponent 6 petrification counters. Now, this card and this UA have a lot of nuances that the card lists down perfectly. However, there is one nuance that I'd like to make clear to everyone, and that's the fact that you can still be stunned even if you're an active player. This means that even if Adjenna goes first, if her opponent does have enough stun guard or soak to blunt her attacks, then they retaliate and hit her for more damage than she has stun guard, you won't be giving out a petrification counter to that opponent. So be very, very careful when fighting against juggernauts with great hit confirm and lots of damage. Now this is the part where I usually tell you that the unique ability isn't everything, and that playing your cards and your card effects are the most important thing. No. With Adjenna, the unique ability is practically everything. Since her cards don't have great stats, it's hard for Adjenna to trade even most of the time, in terms of life. So, for you to trade even, you have to be giving petrification counters out to your opponent. So don't be discouraged if your opponent has more HP than you. Petrification counters technically count as 3 or 4 HP worth of damage. So don't worry about that. Now, do note that you start off with no petrification counters on the opponent, which means that Adjenna's hardest beats are the early beats. But the moment that she gets some petrification on you, she'll ride that snowball to victory. So, when using Adjenna, remember that if it's hard at first, don't worry. Things get better. Now, aside from that, playing her effectively is just all about playing her cards right. So I suggest we move on to that now. First off, we have Beckoning. Beckoning is a great card, albeit having some weird minimum range. It has stun guard for each petrification counter your opponent does not have, which means that this is an early game card as it gives you stun guard 5 when your opponent has no petrification counters. Now, the on-hit effect allows you to pull opponents closer to you, which is really good if we consider that Adjenna wants to be melee to give you petrification counters. Now, in terms of attack pairs, this goes well with Grasp as it lets you put people even closer to you, or Drive so that you can get closer, then pull people closer to you. Either way, it's a petrification counter just waiting to happen. Next up is one of my favorite Adjenna attacks, and it's Pacifying. Pacifying is a permanent dash bait card. And by dash bait, I don't mean your opponent wants to dash this attack. I usually mean is that you pair this card with dash quite often, because of its after activating effect that allows Adjenna to move 1 or 2 spaces. Because of that, this basically gives Adjenna a full board dash, which lets her dodge the opponent and be in melee range. Perfect for giving petrification counters out to opponents. Now, as an added bonus, if the opponent wants to get away from you or try to move out of your melee range, well, they lose life equal to the amount of petrification counters they have. At sometimes, this attack pair can possibly deal 8 damage to an opponent who's very unsuspecting of what you might be playing. Just make sure not to be very predictable with this attack as it's one of Adjenna's best. Now, if you don't want to pair it with dash, I also suggest that you could pair it with either drive or burst, because these two benefit well from the movement passive effect that this card has. Burst makes it so that your opponent driving towards you loses life, while drive just has great stats, and this card needs great stats to work. Irresistible is one of my favorite Adjenna attacks because it has magical stun guard 3, great stats, and a before activating pull if the opponent hit you this speed. Now, the pull does not only work as a great way for hit confirm, it also means that you can give opponents petrification counters. Now, I usually pair this attack with Shot because Shot has stun guard and, well, the range is amazing, and Shot is slow. Or if you want to deal more damage, pair this with Strike for stun guard 8 and possibly dealing 4 while still giving a petrification counter. Now, arresting is a mid to late game style because it gives you soak 1 for each petrification counter your opponent has. Usually I use this card to stall beats. However, you can also use it to make unsafe attacks even more safe. Do note that for each point of damage you soak, you get pushed away. However, you can mitigate that with the before activating effect as well as the base. In light of that, I pair this attack with Drive so that I can get closer and give a petrification counter, or Gaze so that I can give a petrification counter from a mile away. Alluring is another great Adjenna style, and long story short, it basically makes opponents at melee range miss you. And since you're going to be in melee range almost most of the time because you want to give petrification counters, this card works really well in ensuring that you don't get stunned and that you give the opponent a petrification counter while countering some of your opponent's best melee options. The on-hit effect, which gives you more power for more petrification counters on the opponent, is simply an added bonus. And if you can make advantage of it, then good, but you don't have to. Now, in terms of attack pairs, I pair this attack with Drive because Drive is great with this because the passive effect technically negates Drive's innate weakness to both Strike and Grasp. If you don't want to pair this with Drive, I also highly suggest pairing this with Dash because aside from pacifying being a great dash pair, so is this attack because even if you can't switch sides with the opponent, so long as you're in melee range, you're still A-okay and you're still going to be giving out those petrification counters. And finally, we have Adjenna's unique base, Gaze. Gaze offers Adjenna a way to give people petrification counters at range. However, its stats and Adjenna's poor priority make this card hard to use safely, so I suggest pairing them with styles that make it safe. Arresting gives you soak, which is great with this card, and Alluring lets you dodge people at melee range, giving your opponent a tough choice. Do they miss and get a petrification counter, or do they risk bursting away and getting hit with a Gaze? Either way, it's a petrification counter on the opponent, and it's one hard thing to dodge. Adjenna's two overdrive finishers are Basilisk Gaze and Fossilize. Basilisk Gaze is a mid-range overdrive finisher that's not that fast, but makes your opponent lose priority equal to the amount of petrification counters they have. This is great for Adjennas that want to finish their opponents off, especially if they don't feel like they'll be able to get those last few counters in. Because on hit, this overdrive finisher makes the opponent lose instantly. If you can predict your opponent well and want to apply a lot of pressure, this is the overdrive for you. On the other hand, Fossilize is a near full board range overdrive finisher with a lot of defense because it has soak and stun guard. However, one thing I like about this is that when your opponent hits you, they gain a petrification counter, which means you can possibly eliminate an opponent who has 5 petrification counters on them already. Aside from that, you deal a lot of damage if your opponent has a lot of petrification counters. Either way, if you want to catch your opponents off guard and you want a generally more safe overdrive finisher, this is the one for you. Now when it comes to using our special action, Cancel and Pulse both have their own uses. Cancel lets you remove that one pesky attack that you don't want to deal with. Pulse lets you get the great positioning for next beat. However, remember that pulsing does not let you give out a petrification counter. I'm sorry guys, we did that during playtesting and it was kinda broken. And now we get to the part that everybody loves, advanced strategies and combos. Adjenna advanced strategy is not that complicated, because it's all about just playing the cards right. You need to play the cards properly, because you're all about guessing your opponent so that you don't get hit and you stay in melee range. Aside from that, Dash is your friend. Dash is every Adjenna's friend. Dash is amazing, because Dash technically counts as a free petrification counter on the opponent, if the opponent isn't smart. Be careful against opponents who will choose to play slow dashes in order to dodge you. Also, be careful of opponents who have end of beat move effects, because remember, those effects resolve after your dash but before you give out petrification counters. So be careful about that. Aside from that, know which of your effects can cancel out your opponent's options and effects. Adjenna's all about hand management and positioning. Being a Flight 4 character, these are two concepts that you should all be familiar with by now. If not, I highly suggest that you play a few more games and you'll see what I mean. As Adjenna, you want to get into the proper positioning, but only if you have the right cards to deal with that melee range. For example, you don't want to be in melee range if you have Beckoning in your hand, because it severely reduces the number of things you can do and makes you way more predictable than your average character. Aside from that, here's one thing that I highly suggest to all of you, and it's that the alternate win condition is not the only way. I told you guys earlier that the alternate win condition or the unique ability is pretty much central to Adjenna's playstyle. That is indeed true. However, I didn't just mean the alternate win condition. I just meant the unique ability, which is giving out counters. You don't have to get all the way to 6. The moment you reach 3 counters is sort of a tipping point for most Adjennas, because that's where a lot of her counter-reliant effects become good. So 3, power plus 3, those are all pretty darn good. So, when using Adjenna, if your opponent suddenly starts making good predictions and dodging all of your counter-giving attempts, try to be a regular character. Try to beat down on them. Try to deal damage. And the moment that they settle back into the comfort of, oh, she's not giving me petrification counters, that's when you give them petrification counters, because they don't see it coming. The key to playing Adjenna is not being predictable, because a lot of her options are only useful if played at the proper times. So be careful when playing Adjenna, and be careful with your cards and manage your cards well, and I'm sure you'll do great with this Dragon Queen. Now here are some Adjenna combos. Combo number 1, Pacifying Dash. I've already sung so many praises for this, I don't really have to explain anymore. It's a full board dodge that gives petrification counters for free while possibly dealing damage to the opponent. I need not say more. Attack number 2, Alluring Drive. I've also given this attack a lot of praise. Played from melee range, you dodge all of Drive's innate weaknesses while dealing with all of the other options that could make you miss or hit you, such as bursts. Either way, that plus the fact that you can possibly deal more damage equal to the number of counters, and the fact that you can get in and deal damage stunning the opponent, and meaning that you can give a petrification counter, all in all, this attack is amazing! And I literally have no reason to say that you shouldn't use it. And number 3, and one of my favorites, is Irresistible Shot. I'm a sucker for Stun Guard. I'm sorry, guys. Stun Guard 5, range 1 to 4, deal 3 damage, 2 priority, possibly giving your opponent a petrification counter in the process. All in all, it's a pretty solid attack, even without the entire petrification counter thing. So, use it, love it, embrace it! And that pretty much does it for this episode of Battle Guides featuring Adjenna. Now if you want to take the Dragon Queen to the battlefield, here are a few last minute tips. Number 1, dash is your friend. Dash 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 dash. Dash is a free petrification counter. Need I say any more? Number 2, manage your cards. Adjenna's only as good as the options in her hand, like many characters. However, for her, it's utterly, completely important. Because she's not exactly the character with the best stats. You can't get away with doing stuff like, I'm gonna be faster than them anyway. That never happens. When you want to play Adjenna, you need to manage your cards right. And when you play them, you need to make sure that they count. Even if you lose the beat, make sure that in some way you're benefiting from playing this card. Be it because you just want to cycle, or be it because it potentially makes your opponent waste a good option. always make good use of your cards, because at the end of the day, Adjenna's all about the cards. And number 3, the alternate win condition is really important because a lot of times it's gonna be hard for you to deal with opponents who are really good brawlers or are really good stat specialists. So at the end of the day, stick to your shtick. You are a character that gives away petrification counters and has an alternate win condition. If you embrace that mentality, but not get boxed by it, you will be a great Adjenna player. So try to give out petrification counters every turn, but if you can't, try to make the most out of it by cycling cards or fooling your opponent into thinking that they're safe by playing an attack that doesn't telegraph you're giving petrification counters. And that pretty much does it for this episode of Battle Guides. Thank you all so much for being patient. Okay, long story short, this video came out late because a typhoon hit my area. Yeah, a really big typhoon. Trees everywhere. My internet satellite thing fell. And I didn't have electricity for like 2 to 3 days straight. So I had to film this late because if I tried to film it at any other time, not only did I have no electricity, the lighting was terrible and you guys wouldn't be able to see a darn thing. Well, aside from that, a lot of the voting characters have come out. So if you guys want to sneak preview some of the backers' choice for the War Remastered Kickstarter, I'll post the link down in the description. Some of them are pretty amazing and really fun. Though I do urge a lot of you to vote whoever you will enjoy, but at the same time, don't just vote for people who look cool. I mean, that's not the only criteria, but voting for somebody who will give great game mechanics, great gameplay experiences is very important too. Like I've said on the forums, a pretty character that's boring is never used, but the ugliest gnome with the most fun gameplay mechanics is used pretty much all the time. Aside from that, I just want to thank all of you again for being so patient with me, and I'm really sorry this video came out late. Don't forget your special action, and thank you, World of Indines. Thank you, and good night.